My name's Kaitlyn Siragusa, and I'm the younger of two sisters in what people like to call a blended family. That phrase always sounds so gentle, doesn't it? Like a warm cup of cocoa on a snowy day. But let me be real with you. Our family wasn't some cozy blend of love and harmony. It was more like oil and water. No matter how hard my parents tried to shake us into unity, we always separated back into our corners. My mom had a life before me. She was married to a man who passed away when her daughter, my half-sister Sarah, was just 5 years old. Tragic, yes. And I always felt a little guilty for arriving on the scene when she and my dad tied the knot and decided to start over. Mom inherited a modest house from her late husband. It wasn't a mansion, but it had character. She also ran a sewing factory that had been in the family for years. After marrying my dad, she asked him to help out with the business. To their credit, they made a solid team. Mom managed the production and people. Dad took over the finances and the boring but necessary paperwork. Together, they doubled the profits in just a few years. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I must have been 6 or 7, pretending to be asleep on the couch. "I hope the girls will take over someday," Mom said, a hopeful lilt in her voice. "Keep it in the family, you know." Dad chuckled. "That'd be great. Kaitlyn's got an eye for design already." "And Sarah's sharp with numbers," Mom added proudly. I remember smiling to myself, imagining a future where Sarah and I ran the place together. A dynamic sister duo. But that dream, it was all in my head. Because Sarah, my dear, complicated, angry half-sister, had a completely different view of things. To her, the house, the factory, every single fork and spoon belonged to her and her mom, who just happened to also be my mom. I was the intruder. The reminder that her family had been rearranged without her consent. "This is my house," she'd hiss, standing in the doorway to her room. "You're just living here 'cause your mooch of a dad married my mom." Back then, I was too little to understand why she resented me so much. I only knew that I wanted to play with her toys or borrow her colored pencils so I could draw princess dresses and dream about sparkly ball gowns. But the moment I reached for anything that was hers, she'd snatch it away. "That's mine!" she'd shriek. "My real dad bought that before he died. You don't get to have it." Mom tried. She really did. "Sarah, sweetie, that's not kind. Kaitlyn's your sister." "Half-sister!" Sarah would spit, eyes blazing. "And she gets everything. It's not fair." Dad rarely jumped in. He'd just pat my head and whisper, "Let it go, sweet pea. She's still hurting." But letting it go didn't make it hurt any less. I remember one day I found a set of colored pencils lying on the living room table, bright and untouched. It felt like treasure. I grabbed some paper and began sketching the dress of my dreams, soft layers of tulle, shimmering with stars. I was completely lost in my imagination until Sarah came crashing in like a storm. "Those are mine!" she screamed, and before I could blink, she tore my sketch into pieces. I ran to Mom in tears. She hugged me, her arms warm and strong, then marched to Sarah's room. "That's enough!" I heard her shout. "You will not treat your sister this way!" But nothing changed. As we got older, the fights became less about toys and more about, well, everything. Mom and Dad tried to be fair. Matching Christmas presents, identical school supplies. They even bought us the same sweater once in different colors. But Sarah always found something to nitpick. "Kaitlyn's sweater is softer. Her necklace has more sparkle. You always give her the best stuff." No matter how even-handed they tried to be, Sarah was convinced I was the favorite. The golden child. The parasite who stole what should have been hers. When I turned 10, my parents made a big decision. They sold the old house and bought a bigger one. I'll never forget the day we moved in. I ran from room to room like I was in a dream, twirling in what would finally be my own space. "This is amazing," I squealed. Sarah stood in the doorway with a sour look. "Don't get too comfortable," she muttered. "This house still belongs to Mom and me. You're just a guest." My stomach dropped. A whole new home, but still the same old story. Later that night, I overheard another whispered conversation in the kitchen. Mom sounded exhausted. "I don't know what to do anymore," Dad replied gently. "Maybe we should take her to see someone. A counselor, maybe?" They followed through. Sarah started therapy, going once a week. I hoped it would help, but it only seemed to make things worse. "Oh, so now I'm crazy," she sneered after one session. "You just want to fix me so your little angel can have her perfect life." I wanted to scream back that my life was far from perfect, but I kept my mouth shut. Arguing never helped. By the time Sarah was in high school, her complaints had taken on a sharper edge. She walked around like the whole world owed her something. And mostly, she thought I was the one who should be paying. "You think you're so special," she'd mutter under her breath, "but you're nothing without me." I learned to dodge her moods. I spent more time at friends' houses, at the library, even in the sewing room at Mom's factory, anywhere but near her. And then finally, one golden day, Sarah graduated and moved to another city for college. The entire house let out a breath we didn't know we'd been holding. "For once," Mom whispered, "maybe she'll find herself." And for the first time, I felt like I could breathe too. Those 4 years while Sarah was away at college were the happiest I can remember. No tension, no slamming doors or icy stares, just peace. I poured myself into school, especially art and design. I'd sketch for hours, sometimes forgetting to eat dinner because I was so deep in my world of lines and fabric. Mom noticed. She'd come home from the factory with scraps of cloth or leftover lace just for me. "You've really got something, Kaitlyn," she'd say, smoothing a hand over my shoulder as she looked at whatever I was sewing. "You see beauty in places most people miss." And I finally started to believe her. I wasn't just Sarah's little sister anymore. I was Kaitlyn, creative, passionate, a future designer with real dreams. When I got accepted into a design college in another city, I nearly cried. I ran down the stairs, waving the acceptance letter in the air like it was gold. Mom and Dad were waiting in the kitchen. "We're so proud of you," Mom said, eyes glassy with tears. Dad gave me one of those long, tight hugs that says more than words ever could. The night before I left for college, they sat me down. "Kaitlyn," Mom said, "we hope you'll consider coming back to work with us someday. You'd be such an asset to the business." Dad nodded. "You could lead our design branch. We've always dreamed of expanding." I promised I'd think about it, and I meant it. But deep down, I was itching to be free, to build a life that was mine alone, without Sarah's shadow hovering over every decision. College was everything I'd hoped for, and more. I found my people, other creatives who understood what it was like to see the world through color palettes and stitch patterns. And during my second year, I met him, Jason. He was a few years older, working on his MBA. We met in the most cliché way. Me, spilling my latte all over his crisp white shirt in a crowded campus cafe. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," I gasped, trying to dab at the stain with a napkin. "It's fine," he laughed, flashing a crooked smile. I needed a reason to do laundry anyway. We ended up sitting down and talking for hours about business, fashion, life, and dreams. He was funny, confident, and most importantly, he listened. Not just nodded along listened, but really listened. Like what I had to say mattered. We started dating soon after that coffee mishap. He was kind and steady in a way that felt like an anchor. And after 2 years together, as graduation loomed, we started talking about the future. "I've got a job lined up here," Jason told me one night over dinner. "It's a great offer. What do you think about staying here, together?" My heart fluttered. I'd just landed a position as a junior designer at a small but promising fashion house. The thought of building a life with Jason in a city we both loved, it was everything I wanted. But I also knew I owed it to my parents to tell them face to face. So we planned a trip home. I was nervous, mostly because I knew Sarah would be there. But to my surprise, the visit went better than I ever expected. Mom and Dad adored Jason. Even Sarah, shockingly, kept her comments to herself. She wasn't warm exactly, but she was civil. And for Sarah, that was practically a miracle. Over dinner one night, I broke the news about the job offer and my plan to stay in the city. Mom smiled. "That's wonderful, honey." But I saw the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Dad cleared his throat. "Actually, we were hoping to talk to you about something." He exchanged a glance with Mom. "What if," he said slowly, "you opened a new branch of the business here in the city? You'd be in charge of design, run your own line. You'd have full creative freedom." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. It was such a generous offer, something I hadn't even considered. I could still chase my dreams while staying connected to the family legacy. "Can I think about it?" I asked. They nodded. The rest of the visit was peaceful. No fights, no tears, just family meals and laughter that didn't feel forced for once. As Jason and I were packing up to leave, Sarah pulled me aside. "Hey," she said, fidgeting with her sleeve. "I know things haven't always been great between us, but I'd like to try and change that. Maybe visit you sometime?" I hesitated for half a breath, then nodded. "Sure, that'd be nice." Back in the city, life moved fast. Jason and I settled into a routine. Work, dinners, late-night design sessions. My boss started giving me more responsibility. And Jason, true to his word, supported me every step of the way. Then, out of the blue, Sarah called. "Hey, little sis," she said brightly. "Guess what? I'm in town. Mind if I crash at your place for a bit?" I nearly dropped the phone. Sarah, in my city, voluntarily? It felt like a prank. But then I remembered our last conversation and the possibility that she really did want to start over. Sure, I said cautiously. I've got a guest room. When she showed up, I barely recognized her. She looked happy, polished. She even brought wine and offered to cook dinner. That night, as we sat on the couch chatting, she said something that stopped me cold. "You know, we should work together. You handle design. I'll run the business side. We'd be unstoppable." I blinked. "What? But I just started my job." "Bring Jason," she said breezily. "There's plenty of opportunity back home." I smiled politely but shook my head. "Actually, Mom and Dad suggested opening a new branch here. I'm still thinking about it." Her face twitched for just a second, a flicker of something old and familiar, but it passed. "Well," she said, topping off my wine, "if you won't come home, maybe I'll just stay here a little longer. We've got so much catching up to do." Against my better judgment, I said yes. And for a while it was nice. She helped around the apartment, even cleaned without being asked. We stayed up late swapping stories, watching movies, eating junk food. It almost felt like the sisterhood I'd always hoped for. One night, over wine, she said, "Let's do it. Start the branch together. You've got the talent, I've got the numbers. We'd make a hell of a team." I laughed. "Let me think about it." And I meant it. Jason started coming over more. He and Sarah got along surprisingly well. They'd joke, talk shop, even debate business strategy. Watching them, I felt hopeful. Like maybe, just maybe, we were all going to be okay. Jason and I set the date for our wedding. 6 months out. I threw myself into the planning with every bit of creative energy I had. I designed the invitations myself, curated the guest list, and agonized over every detail from the centerpieces to the hors d'oeuvres. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about finally building a life that was mine, beautiful, intentional, and far away from the chaos I'd grown up with. Sarah was with me every step of the way. She offered suggestions, picked up slack when I got overwhelmed, and even dealt with a couple of snippy vendors on my behalf. I started to trust her. Genuinely. We laughed late into the night, sometimes dreaming together about our business venture, sometimes just reminiscing about our childhoods. And for the first time, they didn't feel like wounds anymore, just memories. Messy, sure, but maybe not all bad. Jason and I had also decided to go through with the plan to open a city branch of the family business after the wedding. Sarah and I talked about it more and more. She'd handle operations, I'd lead creative. It sounded like the perfect match. "We're going to be unstoppable," she told me one night, her wine glass clinking against mine. 2 months before the wedding, I was juggling everything. Work, the launch prep for the new branch, wedding stress. It was exhausting, but it was the kind of busy that fills you up, the kind that says you're building something real. Then the call came. "Kaitlyn," Dad said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's your mom. She's not doing well. She's been feeling off for a while, but you know her. She didn't want to worry you." I froze. "She's seeing doctors," he added quickly, "but things are serious. I'm struggling to manage the house and business alone." I didn't think twice. "I'm coming home." Sarah looked uneasy when I told her. "I wish I could come with you," she said, avoiding my eyes. "But I've got some meetings I can't move." I didn't push. "It's okay, I'll keep you updated." What I found at home crushed me. Mom looked pale and fragile, her once strong voice reduced to whispers. The diagnosis was harsh, a tumor. Immediate surgery required. It felt like the world had cracked open underneath us. I shifted into survival mode. I took over the housework, helped Dad manage the factory accounts, and spent every minute I could by Mom's side. I arranged to work remotely, designing from her bedside and checking emails between doctor's visits. Jason and I tried to stay connected through video calls. At first they were daily. His familiar face on my screen brought comfort. "How's your mom?" he'd ask gently. "Stable today?" I'd reply, voice tight. "How's everything over there? Sarah behaving?" He'd chuckle, reassure me, and we'd talk for a while. But slowly the calls grew shorter, then less frequent, until they stopped altogether. I told myself it was the stress, that once Mom got better, everything would fall back into place. But then my texts started going unanswered. Days passed, then a week. The silence was heavy, like a brick on my chest. Something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling. I booked a flight back to the city without telling anyone. Some small part of me still hoped he'd greet me with relief, that he'd been overwhelmed or sick or something. I let myself into our apartment with the spare key and paused in the silence. Then I heard it. A laugh, a soft, familiar giggle. From our bedroom. I wish I could say I knocked, or paused, or braced myself, but I didn't. I burst in, and there they were. Jason, Sarah, in our bed. Time froze. The air left my lungs. "What the hell?" I choked out. They scrambled, but neither looked particularly shocked. If anything, they looked relieved, like a secret had finally been let out. "We didn't expect you back so soon," Sarah said, clutching a sheet around herself like it made her decent. "You didn't expect?" I couldn't even finish the sentence. My voice cracked. My knees buckled. Jason wouldn't even meet my eyes. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "It just happened." "Oh, please," Sarah cut in, completely unbothered. "You two were never a real match. Jason and we get each other." She smiled, like this was normal. "And actually," she added, "we were hoping we could use your wedding plans. I mean, everything's already paid for." I stared at her. My brain couldn't compute what she was saying. "You want to use my wedding for you?" "It just makes sense," she shrugged. I don't remember leaving the apartment or the airport. I only remember sobbing into my childhood bed until I had no tears left. My parents found me like that. They didn't say a word. They just held me. When I could finally speak, I told them everything. Dad's face went red with rage. Mom looked heartbroken. "I'll handle this," Dad said, pulling out his phone. I heard the conversation, short, sharp, brutal. Sarah screamed through the receiver, "You're taking her side again. You always have." Dad's voice was cold. "If you go through with this, you're out of this family, for good." "Fine," she spat. "I don't need you anyway. I've got Jason now." Click. Mom pulled me into her arms. "I'm so sorry," she whispered over and over again. I felt like I'd aged a decade in one day. I wasn't a little sister anymore. I was a woman burned to the ground by the two people I'd finally dared to trust. The days after the betrayal blurred together. I couldn't eat, could barely sleep. Some moments I curled up in bed, drowning in grief. Others I felt rage so hot it made my vision swim. One minute I was mourning my relationship, the next I was planning to sue both of them for every cent I'd spent on that wedding. It was during one of those angry planning sessions that my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, voice flat. "Kaitlyn, it's Margaret, Jason's mom." I nearly hung up, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded broken. "I don't know what to say," she began, her voice trembling. "We're so sorry. Truly, my husband and I, we're devastated. We always loved you like a daughter. We can't believe what Jason's done. And Sarah," she sighed, "what kind of sister does this?" I didn't know how to respond, but I listened. "We want to make this right," she continued. "We know it won't fix everything, but we'd like to cover all the wedding costs. You shouldn't bear that burden." A few days later, the check arrived, every penny accounted for. It didn't fix the hole in my heart, but it helped me breathe a little easier. As the date of what would have been my wedding approached, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to the city, not yet. Too many memories, too much pain. Over dinner one evening, I looked up from my plate and asked, "Would it be okay if I stayed here for a while? Help with the business?" Dad didn't hesitate. "We were hoping you'd say that." Mom's eyes sparkled for the first time in weeks. That night, I sat at my desk, opened my sketch pad, and started designing again. With fire, with fury. Every line, every stitch was a declaration. "You didn't break me, you just gave me fuel." We launched a youth line under the company name, Bright, Bold, Unapologetic Fashion. It took off. Within a year, I'd helped grow the business by over $1 million. Industry magazines started calling. Fashion blogs raved about the fearless flair of the new creative director, Kaitlyn Siragusa. Sarah and Jason? I stopped wondering about them. They were ghosts, until one summer night 3 years later. We were finishing dinner at Mom and Dad's when the doorbell rang. Dad frowned. "Expecting anyone?" I shook my head, an odd chill creeping down my spine. Mom opened the door. "Well, well," a familiar voice sneered. "Look at this cozy little family gathering." Sarah. Her face was different, hardened. Her eyes were hollowed out by years of bitterness. "What are you doing here?" I stood up, my voice steady. She sauntered in without invitation. "Thought I'd see how the happy family's doing, especially now that I'm newly single." "What happened to Jason?" Dad asked, stone-faced. She let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out he's a cheater in every relationship. Ran off with his secretary. Figures, right?" I felt a flicker of something. Not sympathy exactly, but a cold kind of justice. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said quietly. "But why are you here, Sarah?" She narrowed her eyes. "I want what's mine, my share of the business. I'm family too." Dad stood. "You gave up your right to this family the moment you betrayed Kaitlyn. You get nothing." "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You can't just cut me out." Mom stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but final. "We already have." Sarah's chest heaved. I saw the moment she realized the door was shut, that nothing she said would change it. "This isn't over," she hissed. Then she stormed out. "We thought that was the end of it. We were wrong." A few days later, I was working in my office when I heard shouting from the lobby. I rushed out to find Sarah, wild-eyed and disheveled, screaming at our staff. "They've lied to you all. This company belongs to me. They stole everything." My employees stared, frozen in place. I called the police, my voice calm even though my heart pounded. "We have a trespasser causing a disturbance. Please send someone immediately." Sarah fought security tooth and nail, and when she was dragged out, she was still screaming. But she didn't stop there. She tried to break into my parents' house a week later, smashed a window. Then, God help her, she tried to set fire to the front door. That was it. We filed a restraining order. No contact, no appearances, no more chaos. The judge granted it without hesitation. After the hearing, I sat in my office overlooking the city I'd come to love. Everything I'd built was here. My work, my identity, my peace. I thought about Sarah, about how much we could have had, about how she burned every bridge she'd ever walked across. There was sadness, sure, but also pride, because I hadn't let her destroy me. I'd taken the pain and turned it into power. Jason's betrayal had left scars, but they didn't define me anymore. I wasn't ready to fall in love again, not yet. But I wasn't bitter. Love would come when it was meant to. Until then, I had my work, my family, my strength, and that was more than enough.